Everyone. We will start promptly at 1 p.m., which is about 2 minutes.
Hey, Jane, look at your text real quick.
I have a great amount of people registered. Thank you so much for that. Coming in. Be patient while we get everyone signed in. A nice way to close out a Friday, Jane. Sponsors, if you want to put your information into the chat box, that would be good. And I have 1 p.m., so let's get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Peggy West, and today we have an outstanding presentation we've all been waiting for, the information on the new laws. We have the 2025 new legislation condo summary by Jane Boland, Esquire, our attorney today. Along with Jane, we have our moderator, Daniel Baum. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to read off the sponsors. And if you're on sponsors, please just give a hand wave. And we're going to try to go through this pretty quickly since we have so many. Let's start with PD Concrete. PD Concrete is full service with concrete restoration. Daniel Pena is the president. We have Munyon Painting. I see Shelley Rubner on there. I also see going to City Quiet, Windows and Doors. We have Ben Friedman, he's the president. We have Jamie Gelfand from First Citizens Bank, full service banking. She is vice president and regional sales officer. We also have sponsoring today Bob Aleka. He's the vice president of community development for Faster IO. Also, his cohort is Vice President of Marketing. We have Michael Zirin. We also have Dawn Miller. Dawn Miller is the Director of Business Development for the Paving Lady. We have also represented today as a sponsor, Nicole Johnson Pendergrass and Mark Landez. Nicole is the partner and the operations director for Hafer Company, and Mark is the audit and a principal. Next, we have Diana Olert. Diana, if you want to wave, she's with Best Roofing. She's the Senior Business Development Manager. And also she has Cameron Andres, who is also a business development rep for Best Roofing. Next, we have the elevator consultants, Clarkson and Varick. Damaris Cabrera, there's Damaris, specializing in consulting. Next, we have Guillermo Padon. He is with Alanak. This is a railing manufacturing company. We also have today in general contracting, we have Priscilla Catano with Valcourt. Priscilla, you want to wave and smile? There she is. Okay. We also have United Professional Engineering represented today, Siobhan Heredia, and her president is Carmelo Giglio, both represented today. Also, we have Unlimited Restoration, Erin Nickerson. She's the sales manager for the state of Florida, full service restoration, so it's unlimited restoration. We also have Steve Mason today as one of the sponsors. He is the National Director of Business Development. Altieri is insurance consultants on the claims adjusting side. And then lastly but not least, we have Katie Bassford today representing Ventium Software. Again, the wind beneath my wings. I can't thank you all enough for running the meeting today. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Daniel, our moderator, to get started.
All right, thank you so much, Peggy. Thank you everyone for joining us today as Jane Boland describes the 2025 legal Florida legislative update. I just want to give a couple of a quick intro to Jane and then some household items, and I'll turn the floor over to her. So for those of you who don't know Jane Boland, I'm sure most of you do because we love having her and hearing what she has to say and updating us. But she's originally from Washington, D.C., had an area focus on the practice. Her legal practice is specifically in community association law. She received her BA in political science from Radford University and has a master's degree in sports management from the United States Sports Academy. And her Juris Doctorate is from St. Thomas University School of Law. Many of you may not know this, but not only is she an attorney, but she has deep connections to the property management world as she actually built and sold a property management company as she was completing her legal education. She's also an elected official, for those of you who don't know. She was elected to the City of Oakland Park's City Commission in 2018 and served as commissioner and mayor until 2022. She currently serves as the board member for the Urban League of South Florida and previously served on quite a few other boards, including the Community Foundation of Broward. Jane is also an author, authoring Mastering the Business of Your Association. And if that wasn't enough, a little known fact about Jane is she was also a producer on Top Chef Season 7 and Master Chef Season 2, and is an excellent cook for those of you who get the chance. So with all of that, not to mention her legal acumen, I just want to say we're delighted to have Jane presenting this for us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have quite a few people on the chat on this webinar. I'm going to ask if you have questions, please make sure you put them in the Q&A. It is way too difficult to monitor the chat and try to follow the questions that come through there. So we will not be monitoring the chat, only the Q&A. Please go to that section of Zoom and ask your questions, and I will ask those questions of Jane as we go through. So all of that said, Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that super generous introduction. And thank you to all the sponsors. And most importantly, thank you to our attendees. It is 1 o'clock on a Friday, and there's certainly other things you could be doing. And we appreciate that you are on this webinar to hear, maybe for the first time, maybe for the second or third time, an overview of what changed in the law impacting associations. So what I'm going to do first is let me just share screen. Let's get going. Here we go. I'm going to share screen and I'm going to, there we go. Can you guys, everyone can see it? I don't see it yet. I think it's on. Yes. Thumbs up. Thank you. All right. Let's get started. So this presentation, there are some significant changes. The law changed effective July 1. What I want you to know is that HB 913 only impacts condominiums and cooperatives. If you're on an HOA, I appreciate you being here. There's maybe 1 or 2 slides that would actually impact you, which have to do with changes to the Community Association Management Statute, Section 468. If you want those, you want to jump off, you want us to send you the slides, that's not a problem. But I just want to be very clear. This is condominiums and there is cooperative overlap, and that this course is for educational purposes only. You should definitely seek the advice of an attorney before taking any action. And as we go through it, you'll understand that there is a lot of room for interpretation. The law is brand new. And I would say to you, your questions are really great because it has us look at nuances. However, I cannot answer, give you legal advice about your actual association. So please pose the questions. We'll do our very best to answer them. But again, we cannot give you actual legal advice. All right. I'm going to go over the logistics one more time. So there's no credits for this. This is not a board certification. This is not a CLE for community association managers. This is not extra credit for boards in terms of the condominium requirement to have an additional 1 hour legal. This does not apply. This is just general educational information about the new statute. Use a Q&A for questions. Daniel will very much appreciate that. And of course, the last thing I need to say is I may be your attorney, but I'm not your attorney because I'm on this webinar. So if you are a client of mine, you're welcome to email me directly. We will deal with that as an attorney-client privilege conversation. Everything else, general in nature, folks, that's what we need to be put in the Q&A. So thank you very much. All right, let's get started. So just an overview. These are the areas we're going to talk about. So HB 913 plus the change in HB 393, which is the MySafe Florida Condominium Pilot Program, is what we're talking about today. And those changes cover a variety of topics: virtual meeting procedures, electronic voting enhancements, official records and transparency, insurance coverage standards, also financial reporting and budget requirements. Then we're going to look at the changes to the milestone inspection, the updates to the structural integrity reserve study, also new CAM regulations and responsibilities, and the ever expanding division oversight, which is going to be interesting to talk about as you will see throughout this presentation. And then we'll finish with the My Florida Safe Condominium Pilot Program changes. I do have at the end a actual timeline to show you where these changes will hit. I think that's a very useful slide. It's something new that I've done. And in any event, this is being recorded and will be on Vintium's YouTube. And you will get a copy of the slides from my firm probably at the end of next week. So make sure that your information's in there. I saw a couple of chats where you've got 10 board members in the room. If that's the case, no problem. Thank you for joining us. We will send the slides to one person, and that's a person registered. So I think that takes us through logistics. Daniel, anything else I missed? We're good?
No, that's it. I will, as per your instruction previously, I will try to add some color on the insurance front. And
Yes.
we will ask Katie to jump in from Ventium and add some color on the posting to website requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, let's talk first about virtual board and unit owner meetings. So I'm actually going to start with the right side of the slide. So what we have seen is that there's a new definition for video conference, and it is real-time audio and video meeting between two or more people in different locations using video-enabled and audio-enabled devices. So the legislature has finally said, okay, yes, post-COVID, everyone is doing these hybrid meetings, if not entirely online. So they have defined it for us. For any meeting conducted by video conference, notices must include a hyperlink to join the meeting and a conference call in number, but you must also have a physical location where unit owners can attend in person. They didn't use the word hybrid in the statute. I'm going to tell you that's the word I'm using now. It's either a hybrid meeting, it's an online meeting, or it's an in-person meeting. So what I see is hybrid meeting. Now, DBPR has rulemaking authority over this. So we are going to see new rules. I don't know when, but there will be new rules that come around how video conferencing works. When that comes out, we'll let you know. But sort of chuckle, the law changed last year to change the course accreditation requirements for board certification. And we still don't have the additional requirements for that from DBPR yet. And just a side note for those of you who have been following, last year DBPR had a whole lot more money put towards it, some 70 plus new employees. There was no additional allocation yet. As you see during this presentation, there's a lot more that DBPR has to take on. So we will see how that all plays out over the next year or coming years. So best practice around video conference definition is a statement that the meeting will be recorded and then kept as a part of the official records and posted to the website for at least 1 year. So I'll talk about more about official records in the website in the next slide. But that statement actually should be there because understand it will be recorded. This takes away any kind of privacy and it will become an official record. For those association board members and managers who've helped create rules around how to deal with the video recording, definitely get with your attorneys on how you can now make some changes because you're going to need to do some adoption after this. So the big change, and one of the first sort of conundrums, scratcher of the head for me, is to the left. But I'm going to actually read what's on the slide and then I'm going to tell you my thoughts about it. So the new meeting provisions. We now have under 718, it permits all board meetings and unit owners, including annual meetings, to be conducted via video conference with specific requirements. Now, I'm going to go over these, but also, you know already, it's a hyperlink to join and you must actually have a physical location. So an in-person annual unit owner meeting must be held within 15 miles of the community or within the same county as the condominium. That used to be 45 miles. It is now 15 miles. Now, this is the head scratcher, guys. Annual unit owner meeting may be held by video conference. A quorum of board members must be physically present if an annual meeting is conducted via video conference. Okay, so why do I think that's a head scratcher? So first of all, we're clear now that if you have a hybrid meeting, you have to have, right, a physical location. But an annual meeting of members is a members meeting. A board meeting is a board meeting. So the annual meeting of members doesn't actually require until this year, until this change, did not require you had a physical quorum of the board. This is definitely a place where I think the legislature had an intent. I think this is going to be clarified. But it is very confusing because why does the board need to be there when it is an owner's meeting? And if you've listened to me talk about being a board members are both owners and board members. They wear two hats. So it's a strange new requirement, but it has to be done. All right. Budget meetings may now be held by video conference as well, which I think is a real plus. And the video conference budget meetings must also allow discussions to be heard by board members, committee members, unit owners physically present. What's really interesting about that particular language is they only put it in regarding the budget meetings, yet they've made all of these changes for electronic meetings. And I would tell you the best practice would be that you would always make sure that you have the right kind of equipment in the situation that everyone can hear. So just like we did on this panel, we did a tech check before we started. I would suggest you do the same thing. So this is the first major shift. I'm going to pause for a second. Daniel, do we have any questions on that?
Oh, absolutely. They are flooding in on this.
Okay, well, maybe we can't answer them all, but let's try.
Okay. All right, let's start with just this. There's some questions about official records, but let's talk about the meetings. So do committee meetings need to have a physical location as well? So I think there's a misunderstanding between committee meetings, board meetings, annual meetings, and member meetings.
Okay, so that's actually a great question. So because video conference has been defined, if the board is going to have a hybrid video conference committee meeting, then you would need to follow what's on the right side of the slide, have the hyperlink, have the call-in, and a physical location. The changes that I just discussed really dealt with only the annual unit owner meeting and the budget meeting. So the legislature, in other words, did not address committees in any other way. So I would tell you, I think the video conference definition absolutely applies.
Okay. So the next question, is the in-person and board quorum only for annual meetings then?
Yeah, so the quorum of a board is only required for an annual meeting. So that's correct, and that is exactly how it reads.
Perfect. And then the question of 15 miles or the same county, is it whichever is closer or just either? It doesn't seem to clarify.
It's either. It's an or. It's not a what is closer. It's an or. And understand it used to be 45, so I think they figured that out and said, hey, 15 miles from the condo or within the county.
Got it. If you do not have a board of director, if you don't have a quorum physically present for a video membership meeting, can you still have the meeting or not?
So that is a great question. We don't have the answer on. I would tell you the plain reading of this would say to me, wow, if we don't have a quorum of board members physically present, we can't have the annual meeting. That's how it reads. So that's the best interpretation I can give you now. I think it may be subject to change either with future legislation, but yeah, literally you need to have a physical presence of a quorum at an annual meeting.
Okay, so then I'm sorry, for the for the annual meeting, does the physically present can speak? Does that mean no one on the video conference can speak?
No, nothing speaks to who can speak and who can't. So first of all, let me dial it back. I think this would be the best way to put it. So in a condominium setting, generally the annual meeting is where the election takes place and no quorum is required, right? To have a valid election, you need 20% of the ballots to be cast. However, if you're going to do that with this hybrid video conference, or if you're going to do it by video conference, you still have to allow everyone to speak at whatever section that is, right? So there isn't a place around the election, but if there's new business, if there's old business, absolutely, unit owners have the right to speak. But it is different than a board meeting, guys. Annual meeting is different than a board meeting.
So, Jane, I'll just say the questions continue to pour in on this subject. Maybe a clarifying,
Absolutely.
simple,
so this is what I
something that just says, this meeting you can do this meeting you can do that.
100%. We are already developing that.
Yeah.
But this is what I think we should do. Let's take those questions. I'd like to do a short webinar on only that topic. And so again, folks, thank you for asking the questions because we don't know what's getting the most interest and or needs clarification. So I think we can promise to do a follow-up on just this portion, okay? And I'm going to move on for timing purposes.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, thanks. Now, there's going to be a lot of questions about this too. All right, electronic voting and balloting in elections. So let me just start before I even tell you what's on the slide, although you can see it. As you know, both condominiums and cooperatives have the ability to choose to have electronic voting. And there's a process for that. And you get a third-party vendor, and there's secure email addresses, and it is set up so you can have a fair, clear, and secretive election. Meaning, when I vote in electronic election now, you don't know how I voted. You just know that I voted when we're doing the tally. So there's going to be a little tweak to that. So the first thing is, that has always been a board decision. Well, that is now changed. So there is now a petition process for electronic voting if it's not already adopted. So it allows associations to permit electronic voting when at least 25% of the voting interest submit a written petition requesting it for the next election. That petition has to be received at least 180 days before the next annual meeting. And the board must consider and adopt a resolution within 21 days authorizing that electronic voting. So what's the change? It was only a board decision. Now owners can petition to force the board to do it. So I'm going to pause there because once you adopt electronic voting, you adopt electronic voting. You can't go back. There's no stopping and just going back to paper ballots. And why does that matter to you as a board member or as a manager with a budget? Is because you have to put in this line item. It's going to be there going forward. Bottom line, owners now can help make that decision. And that's the change that we've seen. But what if you don't have that? So this is where I really wish the legislature had maybe listened to the lobbyists and the attorneys. So there's a new email balloting procedure if there's no electronic voting adopted. So the association must designate an email address specifically for receiving completed ballots. Okay, so this is completedballots@gmail.com. I'm making that up. And then those electronic ballots must include fields for the unit owner's number and their full name. And when they type in their name, that's going to act as their electronic signature. And then there has to be a prominently displayed disclosure that basically says you have waived your right to secrecy. So if you are going to use this process as an owner or as an association, you need to let your owners know the only way to keep your vote, who you decided to vote for, secret, is to vote through our electronic voting system, show up at the meeting with a ballot. But if you email it in, you've waived your right to secrecy as to who you voted for. So that's a major change. And what they've done to make sure that this email option would work is they created this affidavit, which they consider a critical safeguard. And it requires an affidavit from the association's designated email address administrator or community association manager, confirming a thorough review of all the folders, inbox, spam, junk, whatever they're called, to ensure all electronic votes are properly counted and recorded. So I would say if, one, for boards, if you've adopted electronic voting extends beyond elections. It could be for other things that unit owners vote for. If you don't have that, you're going to need to think about this email procedure. And then again, CAMs and board members, we have yet another affidavit. And so on my next slide, we're going to talk about affidavits a little bit more, but you have another affidavit that you must complete. So this is a massive change. It's going to create some confusion. I think, again, the division has authority here. We may see some rulemaking from them around it, more than what the statute provides for. But major change in terms of electronic voting and elections. All right, real quick pause because the time is flying way faster than I thought. Daniel, anything on there that I can answer quickly?
So just double checking that this is applying to condos and not to HOAs?
Correct. This is only for condominiums, and this provision does apply to cooperatives as well. This does not apply to HOAs.
Okay.
But I would tell you guys, it's probably going to come next year because if they keep it in, they're going to change the statute next year. I guarantee it. Anyhow, that's just my pontification. Go ahead.
Can the board have electronic voting without an amendment, or if it's not in the current association documents?
Correct. They can. So statutorily, this changed a couple years ago. So back in the day, we used to say you must do an amendment. But you can use electronic voting. However, you should speak to your attorneys because there's always something called coffin language, and the determination by your counsel as to whether you should have an amendment or not is going to be based on that. Oh, we have somebody.
Amanda, your mic is on. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn to Katie in just one second. Sorry, let me just see what else we got here. How do you prevent someone casting someone else's vote if it's electronic? Katie, what?
You can't. There's nothing in here that says you can't. This is going to cause an issue. Yeah. Somebody absolutely is going to send in ballots. They're going to use that email. I think we're going to see a lot of rulemaking around it because that's exactly the scenario that I played out. Like, what's going to stop somebody from, and then Katie, if that happens, we're going to have issues.
Yeah. So Katie, how does, if you could give us a 30-second, just because you're on this call and you guys offer this service, can you just explain real quick? So how does Ventium software handle electronic voting if somebody wanted to implement it?
Yeah, great question. So we do offer an official electronic voting tool. So that's going to be one vote per unit. All of that resident information is already in the platform if you are a Neighbors user. So they're going to have the ability to go in and cast their ballot. You're also going to have the ability to give any sort of context about that vote as well. So if there's any kind of disclaimer that needs to be presented before they cast their votes, that's going to be visible as well. And those results are sealed, so you can tell who voted, but not how they voted.
And then obviously, if you use that solution instead of the email solution, you don't have the problem of people potentially sending in other people's votes, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah. Again, Jane, there's a slew of additional questions that pop up on the subject. Do you want me to continue or do you want to move on?
Let's move on, folks. And then I'm also going to open up And I'll look at the chat as well, and we'll do that at the end. But I think let's move on because we've got more meat here. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to put your questions in the Q&A. Hopefully, as we get through this, we'll also take some time at the end and try to get through as many as we possibly can.
We will. And again, I just want to say this, your questions are useful because it may highlight something us attorneys may not have thought about yet. I mean, certainly there's a lot the legislature didn't think about when they made some of these changes, but as we think about how to counsel it, I say ask any question, there's no bad question. All right, let's move on to official records and transparency requirements. So we have an expansion around official records. Video recordings of all meetings conducted by video conference, committee meetings, and unit owner meetings are now considered official records. Video recordings must be retained for at least 1 year from the date they are posted. They've also just reiterated bank statements and ledgers as part of the official records. And then copies of all affidavits received or created by the association are now considered official records. So we could absolutely do a 30-minute webinar on just all the affidavits required at this point, but these affidavits are really important because it gives us a presumption that you've done it properly. So website access requirements. So associations are required to maintain a website or mobile app. The ones that are required to maintain a website or mobile app must post official records ready for this within 30 days of creation or receipt. That is new. And that includes all approved minutes of board meetings held during the preceding 12 months and video recordings or hyperlinks to video recordings of all meetings for the last 12 months. Now, what I think is interesting here is we've never seen the requirement that they go up in a certain amount of time. We've had the requirement that they're accessible, but then they threw in this approved meeting minutes, and I've had boards say, well, we can't approve the minutes because people aren't here and it doesn't work. It's something you're going to need to work out. And the other note that's not on this slide is if you have 150 units or more now, as a condominium, you're required to have a website. Well, as of January 1 of next year, 25 units or more are required to have it. If you are required to have it, then these website access requirements apply to you. Before I go on to increased director liability, Katie, I'm just going to ping you one more time because this is your space. I do not run websites for associations. What's your feedback here? What do you think? How does this land for you? And what is Vintium doing to really get into alignment with it?
Absolutely. So I think that there's a lot of silver lining in some of these requirements now. I think that residents having easy access to things like your bylaws, your financial records, I think inherently that's a good thing. Transparency is what we want to be going for between the board and residents. So with a platform like Neighbors, we're going to help you not only check the compliance boxes, but also really just increase that sense of transparency. So we're going to allow you to store all of your official documentation, unlimited storage, so you can go back as far as you need to for those historical records. We do have online meeting functionality as well, and those recordings can be automatically posted to your Neighbors website. So I think it's just a really great way to allow residents to have easy access to that information, and you spend a little bit less time acting as a middleman as a board member as well.
Thanks so much for that. And that's great to know that there's an automatic because it is yet another thing to do, both from the board's perspective and a manager's perspective. Okay, so whenever we talk about official records, the word transparency is always comes up. And last year, there was a change where it said if a board member repeatedly ignored an official records request, they would then be liable for second-degree misdemeanor and removed from office. They have now taken that word repeatedly out. So essentially, a board member, director who knowingly or directly denies a unit owner access to records, even once, could be charged with a second-degree misdemeanor and removed from office. So my practical pointer is sort of absolutely take it seriously. But as a reminder, it's 10 days. So 10 days from the request. And if you don't have the records or they're seeking something attorney-client privileged or you have a question, you need to let your attorneys know immediately when you get the official records request. Please do not wait till day 9. It makes things difficult. And As a reminder, the board member certification now has records as an entire records and transparency as a requirement. So you're going to hear more and more about this. And my number one thing is just implement a process to handle it. So just be clear who receives official records requests, who's handling them. It is a very simple thing to determine. But if you do not know that and you are on this webinar right now, it should be on your next agenda as a discussion item. Okay. I'm going to move on to Daniel, your favorite, unless actually, hold on, let me hold. Do you have a couple questions? I can take 2 or 3 right now.
I mean,
Is it too hard?
it's just endless. I think one of the things I saw that I thought was a good question to ask is if you do have the recorded message, are you required then to record them? So if you're doing a Zoom, for example, are
Yes.
you required to?
Yes. You're required to record, folks. You
Okay.
do video conferencing, you do a hybrid conference, you decided to use Zoom only for audio, you're recording that.
Right.
Absolutely.
So as a follow-up to that, just to confirm, so if you choose to do a video recording, and that's the best practice, which it's not required, but if it's recorded, then you have to post it.
Correct. And
Perfect.
that gives you pause to think about whether we want to do that. That's a reasonable response.
Right. So I
Definitely.
think that's the big question is I think that people keep running into is what is required of us when we go into the technology side of things and bring technology into it versus what we can choose to do. And then what are we required to post and make public to our audience, to our community versus what do we not have to? I think that's where people are getting tripped
I'm
up.
going to make it really simple. You can continue doing things in person. It is a may, not a must, but if you do it, it is an official record. It must be recorded and it must be put online if you're
Right.
required to have a website.
Right. And I would encourage everyone. I have nothing to do with Ventium except that I really like them and they're nice people and they do a really good job. But I would encourage everyone to start really actively looking at digital solutions going forward because this is becoming more and more complex and they're starting to come up with I want to say, I dare say, draconian measures if you're not following what they're requiring of you to do as far as the legislature is concerned. So I think for any associations who have not really begun to look at the digital solution going forward, I think it's time. I think we've just reached that time, but that's just my 2 cents.
The last thing I'll say to you is wait for coming attractions because there's rulemaking authority by the division, and we're definitely going to see some around this without a doubt. One last thing that I was asked in my last webinar is people asked me if video conferencing was only Zoom. No, it's any video conferencing platform. Let me just point that out because in this world, like we think it's like a Xerox. You think it's only Zoom, right? It's not only Zoom. It could be anything. You can't get around it, is my point. Any
Right.
video. Okay. I'm going to switch into your favorite subject, Daniel, insurance coverage requirements. So let me go through this and then I'd love to hear your input. So we have an update on valuation requirements. So under the amended statute, condominium associations must determine adequate insurance coverage, and that may be based on the full insurable value, including replacement costs or similar coverage forms. So what is the change there? It's the may to the, it used to be must, and now it's back to may. Okay, so it may be based on that. And replacement costs of insured property must now be determined by either a current independent insurance appraisal or an updated version from a previous appraisal. But the most important thing to remember here is the replacement cost must be assessed at least once every 3 years to ensure coverage amounts keep pace with changing construction costs and property values. So the division, and in our last slide around the division, you'll see this. They have explicit authority now to investigate complaints related to an association's failure to maintain adequate insurance. So that definitely underscores the requirement and the importance of this compliance. But remember, boards are required to use best efforts to get their insurance, and none of that has changed. You're still required to have a best effort to get insurance. I know insurance rates have gone up. I've also seen them go down. Daniel, I'm going to turn to you because you are the expert in this area.
Yeah, thanks. So I mean, I would say, Jane, it honestly, it only makes me more confused because in the past, when they say must, at least we have clear direction on what is required of us and what
Yeah.
the line is between when we're fulfilling the obligation of 718 and not. Where I get confused now is must determine adequate insurance coverage may be based on full insurable value. Well, if it's not based on full insurable value, what's it based on?
Yeah, I don't know what the similar coverage forms are. That's what I was going to ask you.
I mean, theoretically, what we're I mean, I hate to say this, in this broadcast, but I feel like it opens the door to the possibility that people would say, well, it may be based on full insurable value, but I don't want to base it on full insurable value. I want to base it on what I think a storm's going to do in damage to my community, which is significantly less than full insurable value. So,
Well,
and then you're going to get an appraisal. Well, the appraiser is going to, if you're required to get an appraisal every 36 months, which isn't different, that's what was the statute previously as well. That is total insurable value. So that is going to be the number that the carriers are going to want to base your policies on. So I feel like it brings more of a question than answer.
I would agree. And I think the key here is the must is around replacement cost, which is in effect full insurable value, correct? So I
Yeah.
think this is just where the wording wasn't great. Let's look for some additional clarification, either from the division or lawsuits at this point. But the bottom line is think about replacement costs every 3 years. Know that you have to use your best efforts. And really, my last sort of opinion around this, Daniel, is I think because there's things like captive insurance or groups of buildings that can get together and insure themselves, they're trying to create some wiggle room around that. And
Well,
that's my thinking as to why it's a may and not a must anymore.
okay, so I want to make two other points. One is the only logical conclusion that I feel like that I'm thinking about as we discuss this is that perhaps the legislature is opening up the ability for communities to use actual cash value versus replacement cost value. For those of you who don't know
Got
the
it.
difference, it's really quite simple. Replacement cost value means what does it cost to actually replace that today? So if it was gone today, what is the total cost to replace it today? Actual cost value is what is the value of it today, less depreciation. So for example, if you took your roof and you say your roof is $1 million, but it's a 20-year-old roof and you've been depreciating the asset over 20 years, then the actual cash value is nowhere near $1 million. So, and you will see insurance policies written for actual cash value, which previously did not meet the statutory requirement of replacement cost value. So my only thinking is perhaps that's to try to loosen it a little bit for those who are comfortable with actual cash value instead of replacement cost value. But it's a little bit of a slippery slope because we don't have a full definition of that. The other point I simply want to make is, and this is the point that I really feel is imperative that boards understand. This secondary point that you make on the right-hand side, where it says that the division now has explicit authority to investigate complaints. Essentially, the legislature is saying if you don't do your best efforts to find insurance for your community and your community owners are upset about that, they can come to the division and complain, and in turn, the division may open an investigation on your community. So it sort of puts the onus on the board even further that if you were not following the practices of 718 previously, that may very well create bigger problems for you now going forward.
I think that is a very good analysis of that. Thank you. All right. I'm going to keep moving and we'll look at questions in just a second. Okay. So financial reporting and budget requirement changes. So everybody knows that you have to do an annual financial report. And that has actually changed. It used to be within 120 days. So now the deadline for delivering an annual financial report has been extended to 180 days after the end of the fiscal year. And it was originally 90 days, no more than 120. So if an owner requests a report, it must be provided within 5 days at no charge. And an officer or director must execute, guess what? Another affidavit confirming that the required notice was sent or the report was delivered. In terms of modified financial reporting requirements, an association that receives approval by a majority vote of all voting interests may prepare cash receipts and expenditures report or a compiled financial statement instead of an audited financial. The shared facilities really has to do with multi-condominium. So I'm just going to jump over that one for now because most of you, 99.9% of you, are not in a multi-condominium. But if you are, please take note. And then let's talk about the next conundrum of the legislation. So this one is beyond a head scratcher for me. It's really, very confusing in terms of the legislature confusing what a board has a right to do and what an owner has a right to do, and whether that's at a board meeting or an annual meeting. So on that note, if a proposed annual budget exceeds 115% of assessments from the previous fiscal year, the board must propose a substitute budget that excludes discretionary expenses. So just right there, discretionary expenses. I mean, I don't know of many discretionary expenses in an association budget, but evidently they believe that it exists. Statutory reserves, non-recurring repair expenses for service components, and insurance premiums are excluded from this 115% calculation. Now, why does that all matter? It's for the kicker at the end. The substitute budget must be presented at the annual budget meeting for a vote by unit owners. So let me take you back. You have to create a budget. You have to determine you then must take out the statutory reserves, the non-recurring repair reserves, and the SERS components and your insurance premiums. You have to take those out and then determine if it's more than 115% from last year. At that point, you then must create a substitute budget for the budget that you want to pass. And I say you, meaning the board wants to pass. And that substitute budget has to exclude discretionary expenses. Now, again, what are discretionary expenses? Not defined. So that's probably because it is up for interpretation, but what would be discretionary? Maybe a contingency line item, maybe budgets for committees to do social things. Those things might be considered discretionary, but I would imagine that any CAM listening has seen many budgets, and every single line item generally has to do with common element. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works. And then the real kicker is if you're in that situation, they've now essentially said unit owners can vote at a meeting of the board, the budget meeting, right? So you're going to need to figure out how to do notice requirements properly. You're going to need to determine with your attorney, are we going to have the budget meeting and then host a unit owner meeting afterwards? Are we going to do them at the same time? How do we carve it out? So CAMs and board members, if you're in this situation, just remember that you heard that the noticing of this is going to be what you need to pay attention to make sure it's right. Because if you're actually in this situation, I imagine unit owners are going to be paying attention and will try to dispute what they can dispute if they can. So bottom line, practice pointer, carefully monitor your budgets, prepare for the potential substitute budget. And, maybe look now at your budgets and say, is there anything that's actually discretionary? Or perhaps talk to your legal counsel about actually defining that for your association. So another super head scratcher. I'll pause for a moment and see if we have any questions. I know there are a ton. Just give me one or two.
It's so great that the legislature just makes things so clear for us. So I think I can answer this myself, but would breakfast items and coffee be considered discretionary for a shared facility? I would have to imagine yes.
I would say yes, that would be considered discretionary.
I think that's a fair one. So previously, if the budget was 115% more, as long as it was not disputed by the owners, you just passed it?
No, previously there was nothing about a substitute budget process. Okay, so previously this didn't exist in the statute at all. What happened for some associations' declaration of condominium would have these thresholds. If it's more than this percentage, you must have a different kind of vote. So that was always based on your own condominium docs. But this didn't exist before. Before it was just a 14 days notice. It's the budget. We're voting on it. That's how it's going. So this is new entirely.
Is there a threshold? Is the threshold for requiring audited financials removed?
No, that is not removed. This is just a modification number 2. That's not removed. And I didn't explain the full financial reporting requirements again, but that has not been modified. One more, and I'm going to keep going.
Okay. Does this mean that budgets are no longer voted on solely by the board?
That's a really good question. So this means that budgets are voted by the board. However, the legislature is now given this opportunity for unit owners to vote on it if it exceeds 115%. So that only kicks in if you're over the 115. But think about it, over 115%, when you take out statutory reserves, non-recurring repair expenses for service components and insurance premiums really will dramatically change your budget. And I think, yeah, I don't even know if this practically is going to matter because of that, because pulling those out, but you have to be aware of it.
Okay, and then just last one.
Sure.
Any relevance on a co-op for this?
Yes, this does apply to co-ops as well.
Okay, let's continue then, and we'll get back to some of the others later.
Okay, great. Investment of association funds. So another, like, where did this come from? But here we are. Okay, so we have new investment requirements. So the statute explicitly requires boards of directors to use best efforts to make prudent investment decisions, and that's straight out of the statute, when investing association funds, both operating funds and reserve funds. And then they actually delineated where you could invest your reserve funds in one or any combination of the following: certificates of deposit, depository accounts with community banks, savings banks, commercial banks, savings and loan associations, and credit unions. I've already received some questions about that for clients that currently have their money in different financial spaces. And so definitely I cannot answer that for you. Speak to your counsel. Just know they said they may. It's not a must, it's a may. And you speak to your attorney about that. So these investment considerations, this is on the right, something that I have put here because I think you need to think about this. Safety of the principal, liquidity needs that you're going to have, the return on the investment, whether it's FDIC insured, and maturity timelines that align with the cash flow. And I think probably the most important thing here is the practical pointer. So the board should not rely solely on personal investment experience. So I know of the almost 500 people on this webinar, you probably have investment experience. You may be licensed. The best practice is to seek advice from a professional financial advisor who can develop an appropriate risk and return strategy for you outside of your association. So just like you ask us legal questions to shift your risk to us, you as a board will seek professional advice, for a reserve analysis, for an accountant. Do not play investor on this. Do not do it, because I am concerned if you do that, it will easily open you up to either a breach of fiduciary duty if something goes wrong. Okay, so talk to your attorneys, but know that this has been out there. And of course, why do you think they put this in here? Because every article and everything that any legislator heard was about increased assessment. So they're trying to figure out, wow, there's a bunch more money here. How do they invest it properly, right? So interesting.
What I find interesting about this, Jane, is that in the list, you have certificate of deposit, and then the only one of these bullet points, a CD is an instrument. Everything else here is the type of institution. So it's kind of strange that they would call out a CD, but not, like, for example, someone on our Q&A is asking about U.S. Treasuries. So
I've been asked the same question, and I think I can't answer that for you specifically.
Yeah.
But my feeling is I don't see why you couldn't use a U.S. Treasury. I think it probably could absolutely, because this is a may. It's not a must invest only in this, but they may invest. So this is almost like it was like a soft entrance into this subject of
Yeah.
how do we help support not-for-profit boards in investing what they consider large reserves at this point. I mean,
I
that's
just
really
find it comical that they only call out one type of instrument and then just talk about the type of institution. That's kind of strange.
well, just wait, Daniel, there's more. Ready? All right, you're going to love this when we talk about funding options. Okay, so reserve funding options. Let's go here. So, and originally before structural integrity reserve studies and the requirement to fully fund Section G of the SERS components, Florida always required that you had reserves, but you had the right to partially waive it or waive it entirely. And when they talked about it, they talked about any component that cost more than $10,000. And that was like painting, paving, roofing, anything more than $10,000. Now, $10,000, that doesn't feel like a reserve item, does it, in this day and age? So they've actually increased that 10,000 to 25,000. So aside and not SERS components, anything else that's more than $25,000 would then be required to be in the reserve. Moreover, there's also a threshold to account for inflation using the consumer price index based on whatever that component is that you need to actually replace. So by February 1st, 2026, and each year thereafter, the division must conspicuously post the updated inflation adjustment threshold on its website. So they did some thinking there, and they've given a directive, and we'll see how that plays out. Now, pooling, this is a major change, and I think really great, because nothing is worse than having to say you've got to go have a unit owner vote when you want to go from single line item to pooled or pooled to single line item. So let me start first with reserves can either be a single line item for a single option, or it could be a pool for multiple options. Associations may now pool reserve accounts for two components or more, and SERS components may only be pooled with other SERS components, maintaining separation between those non-structural items and the SERS items. So in layman's words, you don't need a vote of the owners to change from single to pooled anymore. Now, let's talk about the funding options for SERS. So the reserve items identified in paragraph G may be funded through multiple methods, regular assessments, special assessments, but now they've put in lines of credit or loans. So what's interesting about that, folks, is you've always been able to do it by regular assessments or special assessments. And special assessments, loans are always secured by special assessments, you know, if you're getting a construction loan for your association, but they threw in that line of credit as well. And I thought, So special assessments, line of credit, or loans require approval of a majority vote of the total voting interest of the association. And the associations may secure a line of credit or loan to fund the capital expenses required by a milestone inspection or SERS. And these funding sources must be sufficient to cover the cumulative amount of any previously waived or unfunded portion of the reserve funding. And the funds must be immediately available for board access without requiring further member approval. Okay, so a couple things. If anyone has had a line of credit, personally, I think we all know lines of credit can be taken away at any time. You can have $1 million line of credit and I need to go tap it, and the bank says, you know what? Your credit just dropped. We're not interested. You don't get that line of credit. So what I say here is that you really need to consider that the banks may not have these options for you yet. However, of course, they're developing them. So strengthen those relationships with your bankers, give them a call. They've always had loans, construction loans for associations, but are you now providing lines of credit or loans that allow us to have sufficient cash if needed? And what is that going to look like for us? It's like they made this up in advance and they're hoping that it gets built by the banks versus the other way around. But okay, this is what's happened. And listen, it would be great if you could have a line of credit versus having to fully fund reserves and literally save money for your owners day to day. That'd be great. really great. I just don't know how practical it is yet. Last thing on this, I just want to point out, and it could be its own course as well, like what prospective buyers and sellers need from the condominiums, but all details of special assessments, lines of credits, or loans must be included in the annual financial statement and disclosed to prospective purchasers. So those annual financial statements are required to be disclosed to them. You need to make sure if you're actually using these funding options, it is included, and you have to give it to prospective purchasers so they're clear about the financial health of your building. Okay, Daniel, any question on that? We'll just take a couple.
So if you did a loan or a line of credit and the funds go into the reserves and the repayment side then goes into the operating account?
Ooh, that's a great question, but not one I can actually answer. Because one, I don't know that they're actually going to just give a line of credit does not mean they're just going to give you the cash. And I'm not sure how the accounting would work on that. I'm not an accountant, I'm a lawyer, but that's a good question for a CPA or your accountant. Being honest.
So if they have an untapped line of credit that requires every 3 years to be renewed, does that mean that on renewal it needs to go to a unit owner vote?
That's also an excellent question. I don't have the answer for that. I think the way the statute reads now is you would need to have that vote for the line of credit. I don't, the way I read it, I don't think you would need that vote, but you cannot take that as legal advice. You must speak to your counsel, and we may see some actual clarification on that. But that's an excellent question. Thank you.
Do you have to draw down the line of credit to put money in the reserves when required for fully funding, or can you wait to draw it down when the work starts?
Yeah, the way the statute is set up, I believe it's that you have it available. So I don't think you need to draw it down because they actually talk about having sufficiency to cover the cumulative amount. So I think the line of credit itself could be that way. However, again, I can't tell you that's clear legal advice. Speak to counsel, but that based on what, our first readings and how this is coming out, I would say that that's my answer. Yeah. I hate saying I don't have the answer, by the way, folks, but I have to be clear with you that, all of us attorneys are also just sort of scratching our head looking, and we knew this legislation was coming, but we didn't know what would be redacted and what wouldn't. And particularly, I reviewed this section, and my comments on this 4 months ago was, banks don't have these products. This is insane, but nobody listened to me on that one. Okay. All right. We're going to keep going. Oh, do you want to do one more? All right, we'll do one more.
Sure, I'll do one more because this one's pretty interesting.
Cool.
So the CERS created a problem in separating roof and painting from residential and other non-residential buildings on the property. Now those costs are split between TRS and CERS. The roof and painting are done at the same time, but we are not allowed to pool between the CERS and the TRS for these items?
You cannot pool between them. It's very clear in the statute, you cannot pool those. Now, I'm not saying there's not a creative way. Talk to your attorneys because I feel creative with that question, but I'm going to tell you the reading of the statute says you cannot do that.
Okay, lots more, but we can keep going and come back later.
I think we have to. I actually didn't think we'd be, it's 2:00. We're already an hour in and we've got, 29 minutes to go. So, all right.
And I think it's clear that there's going to be a lot more questions and we may need to do a follow-up.
I think the key here, guys, is this is a general overview here at once. And by the way, I'm going to say, listen to it many times with other people talking about it as well. And then we can hone in, especially with Peggy's great team, to hone in on some smaller spaces and really get some other experts on the line as well. All right, let's go to milestone inspection requirements. So the big talk is that under 553, there has been a clarification, and this came out in the very beginning. What is, is it 3 stories or more? And what does that mean? And is it the parking garage? They have said in the statute, it's habitable. And that is defined as the Florida Building Code will define it as a habitable 3 stories or more in height. Now, this has created a lot of distress because some folks believe that this only applies to milestone. I believe it also applies to CERS. So habitable stories has been Defined is the bottom line. It's 3 stories or more that are habitable that require the milestone inspection. However, remember, milestone inspections are done by your county. So the authority you need to speak to is the county as to whether your story is habitable or not. I can already imagine a first floor parking garage that has cabanas for use. That I can't tell you whether that's habitable or not. You got to go to your county and find out. So there's that. Next thing I want you to know is there's a new requirement for the local enforcement, which is the counties, to submit an annual electronic report by the end of the year and every year thereafter, basically letting them know how many milestone inspections have been done and whether there's any delinquencies. So I think you're seeing this all tighten up, and there's more attention to it, and that's a great thing for safety in Florida. In terms of temporary funding relief, here's yet another one. For budgets adopted on or before December 31st of 2028, if the association has completed a milestone inspection within the last 2 calendar years, the board, upon approval of the majority of the total voting interests, may temporarily pause reserve fund contributions or reduce the amount of reserve funding for up to 2 consecutive annual budgets for the purpose of funding repairs recommended by the milestone inspection. Now, I actually think that makes a lot of sense. There's definitely some questions around it. But the idea is if your milestone inspection came and they said, we have spalling issues, there's concrete restoration issues, and you have to at the same time pay for that and put it in reserves, it almost feels like a double charge, not even it's not a double dip, it's like a double charge to the owner. So what they're saying is, hey, if you're doing those things, you can pause your reserves while you're getting it done, and 2 years seems to be the reasonable length. However, if you do this and you pause it, a new structural integrity reserve study must be performed before continuing your reserve funding plan. Now, why would you need to do that? Well, your component, when you had it originally done with SERS, had the 40-year-old restoration, concrete restoration. Now it's done, and now that's going to change the reserve analysis to the association's benefit. So another interesting area that's going to cause a lot of questions. I will not answer anything specifically to an association on this unless you are my client. Email me directly. However, this is an option, and I think this is really what the headlines picked up as, like, there's a pause, it's going to be great. Yeah, maybe. Depends. If you've already had your milestone done, does it apply to you, and the like. So last thing on this slide is the conflict of interest provision. This came as a response to the licensed engineers and architects who are bidding on milestone inspections. They now must disclose in writing if they intend to bid on any services that are to be recommended in the inspection report, and this creates way more transparency. And if they do not do so, the failure to do that disclosure, contracts become voidable. So it's the scenario where we didn't, they're pitching us for work, and they also have an interest to have us do work. And so I found that very interesting. Okay, there you go. That's the milestone inspection changes. I'm going to go to SERS before I stop to talk to you again. Daniel, give me 1 second. So the updates around structural integrity reserve study, again, milestone inspection required by the county or is done by the county. The structural integrity reserve study is a budgeting tool. And what we have seen now is that the deadline has been extended. So for condominium associations that existed before July 1, 2022, that initial SERS has to be extended to the end of this year. Now, for all intents and purposes, I see most of our clients have already done it. It's not been a problem, but there has been an issue with the market not having enough people to do it. So I think that is the issue there. And they've said we're going to extend it out to the end of this year. There's also a new exemption for 4 family dwellings with 3 or fewer habitable stories. They're not required to have a SERS study done. And there's another new affidavit. This is the 3rd one we've talked about in this presentation. An officer or director of the association must sign an affidavit acknowledging receipt of the completed SERS. Ensuring official recognition of this document is critical. So make sure you get that done. Here's the good news, and yet another thing on the to-do list of the division. So the division has to adopt a standardized form for SIRS, and this form will be developed in coordination with the Florida Building Commission, and that'll give us some uniformity and consistency in the preparation and reporting. This should be a huge sigh of relief for management companies who get different reports and have to figure it out. For anyone who's a real estate professional who's tried to read a reserve study to determine how to fill out the condominium addendum, this will be very useful for you. And then I jokingly say this is yet another thing the division's going to need to do. And it just adds to all of the things we're going to be waiting for. All right, last thing and very important. Baseline funding requirement. So SIRS must include a recommendation for a reserve funding schedule based on baseline funding plan that provides a reserve funding goal where the reserve cash balance remains above zero each year. The SIRS may recommend other types of reserve funding schedules provided each of those schedules is sufficient to meet the maintenance obligation. So I also scratched my head on this. Why do we just throw in the term baseline funding? What does that mean? Spoken to some CPAs, would be great to have a short webinar with a CPA on this. So baseline just means like literally baseline above zero. Fully funded is to meet your threshold, and then there's right below, which is like the partially waived portion. But baseline, you cannot go below zero on any of your SIRS funding. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and then we will ask for a couple questions, and hopefully I can answer them, and then we'll move on to our last couple slides. Daniel.
All right, let's see where we jump in here.
I'm also going to open the Q&A here to help you. Give me a second.
Yeah, there's 79 questions.
I see it.
It's kind of hard to decide which ones are the ones that I want to give you. Let's just start. Are the SIRS affidavit retroactive?
That's a very good question. I think it's required now. So in my opinion, if you've already done it, you weren't required at the time to have the affidavit. I think this has to go hand in hand with this extension of time. So if you've already done it, I don't believe it is required. However, it is a great question for your attorney. And again, we all have different interpretations on this, but to me, the plain reading is we've extended the statute, we've extended the deadline, and now that we've extended it, we also want the affidavit. So that would be my answer.
If your milestone did not recommend any repairs, does that mean pausing reserve funding is not an option?
That is correct. You cannot pause reserve funding if there's no repairs required.
Would repairs through a concrete restoration company without an on-site engineer be considered a violation under current legislation?
Without an on-site. So that is a very specific question.
Yeah.
One, I don't think nothing in the statute requires an on-site engineer. So I can just tell you that nothing in the statute requires that. I think it is a very specific question based on your contract. And it sounds like you probably wanted an on-site engineer, but nothing in the statute requires that. So,
yeah. Were there changes to 718 that discuss the DBPR having to create related rules? How do we comply with the changes before DBPR issues the required ruling?
Yeah, no, there's a lot. I'm actually the next slide is around the division and DBPR. So a lot of the statute requires that they create rules. Once the rules are published is when they'll become effective. So there won't be if you're worried about being like retroactively, punished for not doing it, there's not a problem. When we find out about the rules, we will certainly send them out on my listserv. I'm quite sure Peggy and the Vintium team will send it out as well. But we don't know when they're going to be done. But when they are published, we will let our universe of folks know for sure.
So this comes up a few times where people are asking if the SIRS was done previously, in this case 2023, do you still need to have an affidavit?
Yeah, so again, you should speak to your attorneys directly about it, but my reading of the statute is this is a new requirement, and if it was done prior, I believe you're not required to have it. However, you should speak to your counsel. I absolutely bet you there's different opinions on that.
Yeah, a couple more questions that same. Baseline funding, is that actually a legal way to fund reserves? Doesn't SERS require full funding?
Okay, so it's okay. So baseline funding. So SERS requires full funding. One, correct. Baseline funding is the schedule. It's the funding plan, and so what they're saying is that you can never go below a zero balance. So it doesn't change the requirement of fully fund.
Um,
Best way I can answer that. Let me
the
do.
Master Association does not fall under SERS now. Can we combine our structural and non-structural funding and just, I don't know what that means. And
A
just,
master association is generally an HOA. It may be a condo. I cannot answer that question because
yeah.
I do not represent you. But you should ask that question to your association counsel. If you are an HOA, then SERS doesn't apply to you at all. However, those individual condominiums absolutely have to be under SERS because it's under 718. So you may have a POA with condominiums, the like.
Okay, I think you can keep going.
I'm gonna keep going because time is flying. Okay, here we go. Thanks for all the great questions, folks. I really appreciate it. So the Division of Florida Condominiums Oversight. So Division of Condominiums, Timeshares, and Mobile Homes has explicit authority to investigate complaints related to the repairs required by milestone inspection, the association's obligation to maintain adequate insurance or fidelity bonding for individuals who control or disperse funds, board member education requirements, and then reporting obligations related to both SERS and to SERS period. So I'm going to use this as just a pause to talk about board member education requirements because it's the first time it came up and somebody had actually asked me about this prior. So everybody is aware that you now have a 4-hour board certification requirement in a condominium, and you must take 1 hour of a legal update every year. That 4 hours you must do one time, and it's good for 5 years. And that 1 hour has not been provided yet by the division. However, if you were a board member prior to the change last year and you took the 2-hour course, you had until June 30th, which is you're past due now, to have taken the 4-hour course. Why do you need to do that? Because you are automatically suspended until such time that you take the course. So there's lots of courses. Get them done. I teach them. I'm actually doing a couple in the next couple weeks, which I'll send out. But you can also go on the division website. Now, I'm going to switch over to the right side of the slide, and let's talk about the new account requirements for condos. So this is kind of interesting. So all condominium associations must create and maintain an online account with the division no later than October 1st, 2025. So that date should go into your calendars right now, community association managers and board members. This account must provide specific information to the division in electronic format. That information that's required is actually the third paragraph. That is association contact information, property information, building and structural data, assessment details, and the name of your bank, as well as SERS documentation. So the division is ever expanding and will now have much more oversight about how community associations are being run in Florida, condominiums particularly. And the division may, with that ever expanding oversight, may request information updates no more than once a year, with the associations having 30 days to comply. And the new initial count setup requires 45 days notice to the division. So we have new oversight. We need to take it clearly. And you know what? This again would be another great 30-minute class on just the division and how it works, both from a board member perspective and a unit owner perspective. Okay, I'm going to go on. I saw here somebody was asking about managers, so I'm going to put this in here. Community Association Manager Regulations. This is Chapter 468 of the Florida statutes. We have some changes. And this applies, this is the one slide I said if you're in an HOA, you might want to listen to it. So this does apply across the board to any association that a manager would manage under a CAM license. So new regulations prohibit any individual whose CAM license has been revoked from either holding a direct or indirect ownership interest in a CAM firm for a period of 10 years following the revocation. and ensuring that all of the disciplinary actions have been completed. The online licensure account is also there. They've always had online accounts, by the way, but they've just put this in here that all licensed CAMs must now create and maintain their own online licensure account with DBPR. And this is basically digital record keeping, because CAMs also have to do a ton of CEUs every year unless you have 10 or more plus years of CAM license. CAMs are now explicitly prohibited from knowingly carrying out any direction from an association that would violate state or federal law. So that's actually pretty huge. CAMs have asked me, the boards aren't listening to me. And we've said, hey, just cover yourself, send a letter, here's my advice, you can do what you want. You actually can't carry out that direction in any way. It will actually subject you to a professional violation, which could subject you to losing your license. CAMs must also comply with SIRS and milestone inspection requirements and include statutory statements regarding professional standards in their communications. And then finally, the conflict of interest disclosure requirements. CAMs must disclose potential conflicts of interest with meeting notices, including clear descriptions of proposed activities, disclosure of their potential conflicts, copies of all the related contracts and documents. And what this really means is the disclosure before was a little like, if it happens, they have to talk about any potential conflict, and they're now required to put it in the meeting notice and make it very clear. The other thing that's interesting is all CAMs must now attend at least one member or board meeting annually and provide association members the name, contact information, work hours, and summary duties of each CAM management or representative assigned to the association. And they're required to give you a copy of the management contract by any member upon request. So you may remember last year in the condominium statute, we had our new 4 meetings a year requirement. And now that's infiltrated, I would say, into 468 to make sure that CAMs attend at least one. So yeah, I think something very important for the boards to do is to verify the license of a CAM or a CAM firm before contracting for services. All you have to do is go to myfloridalicense.com. And if a license is revoked during a contract term, the association has a right to terminate the contract by providing written notice. So a whole slew of new things that are happening in the CAM world. But the most important from a board member perspective, I think, is the bottom. Make sure you have a licensed CAM, make sure the license hasn't been revoked. And on the converse side, if you want to terminate and it's really that terrible, then the revocation of a license would allow you to terminate a contract. Okay. You know what I'm going to do, Daniel? Because of time, I'm going to do my last slide and last 2 slides, and then I'm going to put it on the final slide and we'll ask questions, okay?
Perfect.
So my Safe Florida Condo program, it was a pilot I guess it was last year. It's been amended to limit the participation to buildings that are 3 stories or more in height, provided that each building or structure is subject to a mitigation grant and contains at least 2 single-family dwellings. The reason they did that is because they had some condos on like individual parcels that were applying, and they wanted to make it very clear. So you must have your SIRS and milestone compliance done. If the windows are common element, the windows can only be subject to the grant if they are actually common element. And prior, it was 100% approval by owners. It is now 75% approval by owners, which is why I put that in bold, because it is a change. The funding formula is $2 for every $1. That was always there, but there were some caps, and those have been removed. So it is just a straight 2-to-1 match. And they can be used for mitigation improvements or devices that qualify for building mitigation credit, discount, or other insurance rate differentials, which I think, Daniel, you probably would find that interesting because they can get grants if it will support them from an insurance point of view. And then eligible improvements. There's a lot of improvements. It definitely was all about the openings to the buildings, but they've now included roof improvements, including the coverings, other water intrusion mitigation measures, which I think is major, and other devices or improvements that are identified in a final hurricane mitigation inspection. So, last fun slide. These are the key deadlines for compliance from HB 913. And this is not for what we just talked about, the MySafe Condo program, but this is just from this. So you must, July 1 is when these things became effective. October 1st is the deadline to do that online account. The extension for CSRS compliance is the end of the year, December 31st. And then the deadline must post the division must post the inflation adjustment schedule by February 1 of next year. And then by December 31st, 2028, if you were an association that was able to reduce their reserve funding, do the temporary pause that we discussed, that is the deadline on that. So final thing, and you'll again get these slides. My information is here, as you can see. I've given you the DBPR website, the Florida Building Commission website, and the MySafe Florida Condo website as well, which also has your application information. And then a shameless plug for the Community Association Institute. I am a member of CAI South Florida's board. If you are in an association anywhere, I would definitely look into getting involved with CAI. And your local chapter, they're here to support, whether you are a board member or a manager, they're here to support the industry and advocate for us. And I'm going to stop sharing now and help you look at these questions. Okay.
Yeah,
Whew,
so
that was a lot.
yeah, I don't know if you want to start at the very beginning or you want to work your way backwards.
Yeah, let me just take a look. Let's just take a look. So Vintium 1, I just want to make sure you guys can download this. I had an issue with the Q&A last time. Can you download the Q&A? Yes.
I
Yeah,
believe that we
thank
can.
Okay, so please download the Q&A, both open and answered and dismissed questions, so I can just take a look at it. And we can see what other small 30-minute webinars we can do. And then I'm going to go back in here. So I'm actually going to the most recent because I feel like, let's just do that. Can a board change a meeting procedure to reduce owners' talk time on the agenda from 3 to 1 minute? Unit owners have the right to speak on all agenda items. You can create reasonable rules and regulations around the amount of time to speak. I don't know that I think 1 minute is reasonable. So I think you need to speak to your association council about that. If your windows are not common elements, can you still apply for grant funds for your roof? Yes. It doesn't mean it's just if you were applying for the grant funds for the windows as an opening, but yes, you can still apply for your roof. Absolutely. Should board members share their email addresses? Well, first of all, that's a good question. First of all, the best practice is to not use your personal email for association matters. You should create an email for the association. So if there is a lawsuit or a requirement that you are to produce the records of the emails, you're not commingling your own personal life with those emails. So I would tell you the trend is that emails are definitely moving into the space of official records, which is quite, can be onerous when it comes to that. Let me see. Are CAM online DBPR accounts visible to the public? I don't know yet. Right now, if you go online, you can see anyone who has a CAM license and you can see their status and you can see the CAM management company. In terms of the other information that they're going to provide, I do not know if that's going to be made public or not. If a board member is not taking the 4-hour class, and are they technically suspended as of this date, as of 6/30/25? Does this mean that any votes they make after that were voided? No, it does not mean that those votes are voided. It does not impact the actions that they took. However, from the date that you determine that they have not submitted the proper education certificate, at that point they would be suspended until such time. Okay, so the question under CAM requirements, what does this mean to comply with the CSRS and milestone inspections? That means the CAM has to be sure that the all of the different components under CSRS and milestone inspections is completed, like affidavits, that proper notice is given to the owners, to the like. That's what that means for the CAM. Let's see. Okay, sorry, these are just like fly-ins, just like you said. Do you know anyone that presents a condo certification in Spanish? I don't off the top of my head, but that's a great idea and maybe we'll do it. Let me see. Okay, co-ops too. I don't know. So George, it's a good question around commercial condominiums, and I would say that where you're going is probably right, and you should speak to your counsel, who I think I know. So you should speak to them directly, but yes, I would say this is for residential condominiums. Are there
Here's a
any new
good one.
requirements?
Here, Jane, here's a good one. What if our accountant has set up the DBPR accounts for all of their clients? Should we set up our own because we can't access it through them?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So if an accountant's done it for you, I would just request a password and ID. Like you don't want to have a multiple account. Get the password and ID from them. You don't, yeah, don't do double counts. Get that done. Um, let's see, during regular board meeting that was conducted. Okay, that's a really long one. Yeah, that's sorry, Lynn. Your question's so specific that I have questions about your question. So you should definitely speak to counsel about that because that would be a legal response. Um, yeah, I would agree that a committed line of credit is not voidable. They are committed unless the association has failed its credit test. I mean, I would agree, but the point is they're not readily available and could be taken from you, and I think that's the point. You do not need member approval to pool reserves anymore. That is correct. And I'm going to take one more. Do we need to have individual pools for SIRS and non-SIRS items? You absolutely, I would suggest that's best practice. You keep them entirely separate. And because the statute says you cannot pool SIRS with non-SIRS, you must do that. And I'm just going to try to hit one more. So reserve threshold, yeah. So the baseline funding is the funding plan for reserves. And when I'm talking about the increase in 20 from to 25K, I'm talking about non-SIRS items, non-SIRS items. And
Here's one on an investing where someone asks, so our property management company does investments. Should we not let them do this and turn to a professional investor?
well, I don't know what kind of investments we're talking about. Like, I don't know what that means. Does that mean that they put it in a money market account for you? It's a good question. I'm sorry I can't answer it for you, but I think you should ask counsel about that. And we're at 2:30, and I'm one of these people that like we start on time, we end on time. So, Vintium, thank you. I know you're going to send me these questions. Folks, we will get out these slides for you. And I would encourage you. Go listen to other webinars. Everybody talks about this differently. Something you heard from me may land differently the next time you hear it. And what you can know is that because you've taken our course, we will send you updates about new board certification courses coming up. We will send you updates about any of these mini webinars that we just decided to make while we were on this course. And I'll do my best to answer questions. You're welcome to email me. I appreciate all of your commitment to community, and thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you to Vinium and Daniel. Thank you for being a great host.
You're welcome. I will add to that for both myself and Katie. Myself on the insurance front, anybody who has questions and wants to talk these things through is more than welcome to communicate with me. I know Katie feels the same way as far as the software, voting, what you have to do for websites. That's her specialty. If you have questions, we're always here to be a resource to everyone on here. I know it's a lot of information in a very short period of time. There's a lot more to dig through. I think Jane would agree. If you have a specific question about your association, please take it to your legal counsel. Don't rely on the information you learned on these webinars for you specifically, unless it's kind of a generic question, but definitely seek guidance. And of course, Peggy, I think, would remind all of you to please go and seek out the vendors who are supporting these webinars, especially if you have questions. I mean, there was tons of questions about SIRS on this and pooling reserves. We have great vendors who deal with this every day, and I'm sure they'd love to hear from you.
All right. Have a great weekend, folks. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Peggy, last words, anything?
Yes, I was just going to say, speaking about SIRS, I do have a webinar coming up July 17th, which is next week on Thursday. I have the president, Will Simons, speaking from Association Reserves. He's probably going to cover all these laws and specifically about all the budgets and so on. So please join us. The next one is the 29th with Rudy Forehand with Benjamin Moore. And closing out the month, we have a new group that put together in Tampa. We have for the hurricane preparedness, again, elevators, roofs, and recovery information. So that one is coming also. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Jane. Great job as usual. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks,